We're in 1 Peter chapter 4.
Verse 6 to 11.
We're going to kind of just review 6 and 7, and what I want to concentrate is 8, 9, and 10 today, maybe getting into 11 and 12 too. We kind of left off last week with verse 7. Let me just read, let me read 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. 1 Peter 4. For the gospel has for this purpose been preached, even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as men, they may live in the Spirit according to the will of God. The end of all things is near. Therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Verse 9, be hospitable to one another without complaint, as each one has received a special gift. Employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks is to do so as one who is speaking the utterances of God. Whoever serves is to do so as one who is serving by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. All right, as we were winding up the last class, we talked about the beginning of this reading and said the gospel for this purpose has been preached. And because of that, we are to be mindful of the will of God. The gospel was preached because we're all going to be judged. Whether we're judged in the flesh, whether we're judged at the end of time, whether we're judged when Christ returns, we will be judged. We mentioned how quickly our lives pass, and that's probably no news to anybody in this room. But Peter tells us in the next letter, with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. So when you read the part in verse 7 that says, the end of all things is near, it's kind of a relative thing. I mean, it's been a couple thousand years since Peter penned this letter, but it is nearer than it was yesterday, and nearer than it was the day before. And so it's all relative as far as an exact time.
Also mean our life.
And it could very well mean our lives, absolutely. Absolutely. You can take it that way also. They have a persecution that's coming up. Peter's been warning them about it now, going on for 4 chapters here. And their lives could very well be cut short. So the end of all things could be physically very near. So.
Well, with reality, we don't know when it's going to be, but every day that passes is one day closer. Because God does know.
He does know.
If God will. They have not made an exact decision yet, but God knows.
Yeah, a time has been appointed.
When He's going to get all He can. When He's given everybody the chance to repent and be His child is what God wants from us.
That's exactly the point. It isn't that He's lackadaisical. It's the fact that He's giving everyone a chance to have an opportunity to make their lives right. And He's not slow. He will remember. There is a day of coming of judgment. So that's kind of where we left off. So we are to be of sound judgment. We are to be of sober spirit. And we are to be earnest in our prayer. I think that's what verse 7 is trying to say for the purpose of prayer. As you see the day approaching, as you realize that your time is near, your prayer should become even more earnest. Instead of saying, well, He didn't come yesterday, He didn't come 100 years ago, He didn't come 1,000 years ago, therefore I guess I can just be lackadaisical and not pay any attention. It's just the opposite. Just the opposite. As you see the day approaching, it should become even more important to us.
Well, all through this book, God warns us to be ever ready.
Yes.
And God warns us what is going to happen to the people that aren't ready.
Yes.
Over and over and over.
Yes. It's just like someone that says, you know, what do you think is going on with politics? Isn't it just terrible? Well, it is terrible. But in the scheme of things, it doesn't compare to the end of the world.
Things have been going on since the beginning of time.
That's right. So
God has dealt with it.
we have to keep our perspective about things. Absolutely. All right, so let's kind of move on from there. I want to talk in particular about verse 8. I don't know about you, but verse 8 has popped up in my life many times, and I just want to ask you how that verse was taught to you. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. What does he mean by love covers a multitude of sins?
One thing to me that I try to think of when I get to not feeling as loved as I really should about everything. First of all, you better remember that God loved you.
Yes.
That you have a chance
Yes.
to see Him in heaven.
Yes.
And if you want to see Him in heaven, you need to have more patience and more love for the people that you deal with every day of your life. And sometimes I lose a little patience there, and I'm really working on that. Because the day goes better when I do use patience and
Yes.
okay, God knows what's going on here, and God is going to help me to deal with it.
Yes. I think,
I
you're...
believe that, Tom. I believe that God will help you through those difficulties.
I'm with you. I think you're right, and I think you're hitting right around where I want to talk about today.
The idea here too is when somebody wrongs you and really commits a sin against you, that you learn to love them, that they will overcome that situation and they will be sorry.
Yes.
The love will grow.
I think Bernie is exactly what this verse is trying to say. I think when you hear these televangelists and when you hear these other congregations that may talk about how love conquers everything, I think they're taking this verse out of context. And there are a lot of, I'll use the term religions, a lot of families that teach in their congregations that if you have love for your fellow man, if you have love for God, that's all that matters. Love is all that matters. And let me just say, love is very important. Love is right up there with, when Jesus was teaching what are the greatest commandments, he said, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your God. Love God first and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so love is very important, but love is not going to take away my physical, personal offenses before God. What this verse is talking about is, like Bernie says, how you deal with your fellow man, your fellow mankind, men and women, is important in terms of your fervent love and how God views your faith.
It has to be sincere from the heart. And people, God knows if it is or not. So that's what we need to keep in mind.
I think that
And dealing with things.
a good example of that was when this young black man was killed by an officer that went into his
Benet.
apartment.
Yes.
And she said she thought that he was in her. And his brother, how he reacted to her at the trial. To me, that was an example of this love that God is.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't know what your version says, but mine says, above all, keep loving earnestly, keep loving one another earnestly. And to me, that means you have to stretch yourself. You have to strain to to do that. It's not something that maybe comes easily for us.
You could almost spend a year talking about this one verse, because you're exactly right. What is the definition of this fervent, earnest love? It is an actual concern. It is an actual genuine interest or concern for someone else's welfare. And I think the example you pointed out was a good example. This man's brother could have very easily been very bitter. He had justification. He had every right to hold a grudge. His brother's life was cut short for no good reason. But yet, he found something in his heart that allowed him to forgive this woman.
Well, I just wonder how those that crucified Jesus felt when he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do.
It would cut you to the heart, wouldn't it? It would cut you to the heart. Do you have something?
Well, I was just going to say a perfect example is Jesus. All the abuse he sustained.
Oh, absolutely.
And that song we sing every once in a while, 10,000 angels with a blink of his eye could have killed them all.
Sure.
But
Sure.
he allowed,
He allowed it to go on.
God allowed. Now you haven't lost a child.
Yeah.
I have.
Yeah. It's terrible, isn't it?
Let me tell you something. It's not easy, and I'm sure God sweated a little watching all that abuse Jesus suffered.
Very important point. I mean, anytime you think that your situation is so horrible, is so awful, so impossible to live with, remember what God went through to see his son die on that cross. And for the reason of a bunch of unappreciative sinners.
Sometimes when I get to feeling a little impatient with things that are going on with my group, I often think, am I maybe a big lot of the cause of this? Am I not showing what I truly want to be showing that is my true feelings? And that may be just as much a part of the problem as I think that it's their problem.
Yes. Yes.
But we have to realize that we all can be, and two wrongs don't make a right.
This is particularly talking about the love we have for mankind. And I read one of the commentators I read before this in preparation for this class was well, who should we be demonstrating this love toward? And one of the commentators says, well, obviously Peter is talking about the brothers, the Christian brothers and sisters that are all being persecuted. And it's hard to argue against that because that's kind of what the letter was written to. But I really think if you take the same passage in other books, you can apply it to all mankind, not just your Christian brothers and sisters. I think this fervent love he's talking about, this genuine concern and sympathy for another person's status in life.
Well, what about the people trying to get across the border into the United States?
That's where I'm headed. That's where I'm headed, okay? We forget that these are humans. These are humans attempting to find a better life.
Children.
A lot of them are children. A lot of them didn't have a choice. Mom and Dad said, we got to get out of here. You're coming with us.
Well, I had a brilliant thought one day.
Yep.
Instead of spending trillions of dollars to build a fence, why don't we send that $1 trillion to them so that they can have a better life in their country?
All you got to do is get elected, I guess.
After reading the book that you started, I have understood more
Thank you.
about the problems that these people had, that I thought, why don't they do this and why don't they do that? In many instances, they're trying to do just that. And now, I don't know if I'd have the patience for dealing with it years for something that should happen in a couple of weeks or a couple of months at the most. And they deal with a problem for years before they can get to the rest of their family.
I mean,
I just never realized that a lot of that's going on that I did realize after reading that book.
I just want us to be aware that there are humans. There are people.
And another thing, I
Yeah, hurting.
realized that they were so much a part of the good part of our country too. The immigrants from way, way back that have come to our country and have added to this good life that we're living. I didn't realize there was so much involved.
Hollywood likes to sanitize the pictures that we see. And without getting too far astray here, one of the shows I was watching over the holidays, some of the shows that come on, was the stories of some of the early entrepreneurs in America, like Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and stuff like that. And they painted a very inspiring picture. If it hadn't been for these guys and their vision, we wouldn't have the railroad system we have. If it hadn't been for these guys and their vision, we wouldn't have the refineries that we have. If we didn't have these people, we wouldn't have this, we wouldn't have that. And I'm thinking to myself as I was showing all these pictures, but who were the ones out there building these things? And for the most part, they were people looking for work. And some of the people looking for work were Chinese immigrants, immigrants from Ireland, immigrants from all over. So,
I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but back many, many years ago, when the Flat River Brothers, back a long time ago, there was a race ride.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the Hungarians had come over here
To work the mines?
to the mines.
Yeah.
And they literally ran them out and had them to leave on boxcars.
Well,
Well, I just had one thought. Even though all that is occurring, I think we ought to thank God a million times a day for what I have.
well, of course, absolutely.
Because it didn't come easy.
No, not at all. I mean, I don't mean to replow ground we've already talked about. So it is what it is. I'm going to take the scriptures that I see before me, and I'm going to try to help you see what they intend to say, and then we'll move on from there. So I think I've done that. It is in fact important that we fervently care, we sympathize, and we love others, recognizing that they may be in a different status than we are, a whole different situation.
Well, you know, we see 100 times a day, the channels I watch, dogs being mistreated,
Yeah,
African children with clipped palates,
sure.
and St. Jude, and the Shriners Hospital, and whatever. And yet, several years ago in the local newspaper, it told you if you sent that organization $20, maybe, now I'm making this up because I can't remember what I read, maybe $1 went for those children's care, and the rest of it went to some guy up here already making $100,000.
Well,
So, you know what? The people that do that, take that $20 that you sent for this child and buy a new car or a new home or whatever. They'll be shot.
ooh. Let's talk about fervent love instead of shooting.
Well, I'm a 5th-degree black belt, remember?
Absolutely, I remember. All right. So, the things that we do to demonstrate this fervent love, this sympathy and concern, brings up the topic of our motives. And I want to spend a little time talking about that. You can do something like Inez is describing here, set up this infomercial that generates thousands of dollars in contributions for people trying to help dogs that are in plight, or cats that are being abandoned, or people that are hurting faraway lands. And they're designed to tug on the heartstrings and make you want to open your wallet. But I think what Peter is writing about here is talking about your own personal love your interactions with others, how you treat others, how you demonstrate this fervent love or this active charity, whatever your interpretation says. And so let's look at 1 Corinthians 13. When you're talking about love, you can't leave without talking about 1 Corinthians 13.
Favorite chapter.
Yep. It starts off, if I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Before I read the rest of it, it's very familiar, starting in 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 1. Before I read the rest of the 13 verses here, when we talk about motives, the biggest motive that comes along is, well, I know I'm supposed to love somebody, and I guess I'll do it because I have to. The Bible tells me I need to love my brothers and sisters, and so, okay, I'll do it, but I'm not going to do it without complaining. So, if you substitute the word complain in here, when you read this passage, see how it changes it. If I speak with the tongues of men and angels and do not have love without complaint, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I know all the mysteries and all the knowledge and I have all the faith so as to remove mountains, but I do not have love without complaint, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, and I do not have love without complaint, it profits me nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous. Love does not brag. It is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Does not take into account a wrong suffered. That gets back into the verse we were just talking about. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things. It endures all things. Love without complaint never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, these will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, we prophesy in part. It goes on and on. We have to do these with a fervent love and not do these things with a complaining thought. Because I really think, and maybe you can correct me here, I really think if our motives are not right for doing good deeds, we might as well not do the good deeds. It just ruins the good deeds.
Well, your heart is negative. Maybe whoever you helped, God helped.
Yeah. It's just up to us to demonstrate the love that we've been given, to demonstrate the grace we've been given.
It's difficult.
It is difficult. It is difficult. And people will take advantage of you.
And I sometimes think I fail.
Well, I'm sure we all fail. I'm sure we all fail. Now, Peter may have said to love your brothers and sisters, but let's look at Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13, verses 1 and 2. Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to whom? To strangers. For by this, some have entertained angels without knowing it. It's easy to love your kids. It might even be easy to love your neighbors. If you have good neighbors. But it's hard to love somebody that's unlovable. And that's what Jesus did. He loved us when we were unlovable.
But he had more patience than I've got.
Well, we are a work in progress.
How much more time have I got to finish?
We are a work in progress. Anytime you start to feel discouraged, you need to remember that. We are a work in progress. You don't wake up one morning and say, man, I got this love thing perfect. I love everybody, okay? Now I need to move on to something else.
Is there a difference between like and love?
As far as the Bible is concerned, I think when the Bible is using this type of love, they're talking about concern, empathy, sympathy, to the point where you are moved by it. When we use the term like, it's kind of like, I like pot roast, you know? I like Saturday. I like Sunday.
And about agape love.
Yeah. It's the agape love. It's the love that you're willing to do something when you see, you're motivated to do something when you see somebody hurting.
When you see somebody needing help and you can do something about it, that's the thing that God expects us to do.
That's right.
And we feel good about ourselves when we do it.
We do.
It helps us as much as it does the individual that we are helping, because we realize that we have done what God would want us to do.
So when he talks about love covering a multitude of sins, that means when the person sitting next to you that has this annoying habit of clipping his fingernails in church, okay, or when so-and-so the two pews up always sings that song wrong, that just, you know, it means you overlook things like that. It means you overlook things like that instead of just sitting here bubbling over with, I need to speak to her. I need to speak to him about what he does. It just drives me
Let me give you
crazy.
some advice, Tom. Church doesn't last, and I'm talking about the service, doesn't last forever. So ignore it for now.
Feel sorry for the woman who has to sweep it up, right? I'm off my soapbox. Okay.
The person that thinks they never do anything wrong is only fooling themselves.
Thank you. Absolutely. No one is going to say they're perfect. Everyone has annoying habits. Everybody has an opportunity to annoy somebody else, okay?
But it's a known fact also, that within the body of Christ, you have a bunch of Pharisees.
Well, yes. We have a tendency to say, well, I conquered this particular shortfall, therefore that person should be able to conquer that shortfall. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Why don't they pull themselves up by their bootstraps? You may not have a problem with love, but I may have. You may not have a problem with giving unbegrudgingly, but maybe I have. Okay? You may not have a problem with clipping your nails in church, but maybe I do. Okay?
I'm now ready for confession.
Uh-oh, you clip
I talk too much.
you don't clip your nails in church, do you? Well, this is the place you can talk. All right, any other thoughts? And so it just makes sense that he should move right into the subject of hospitality. Let's look at verse 9. What's he write? Be hospitable to one another without complaint. What is hospitality? Just being nice, isn't it? Opening up your home, opening up yourself.
You know, there used to be a lot more of that than we see today.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it anymore is due to the fact that people are really scared to open their home and fearful of what might happen.
Yes.
Of all the sin that's around us.
Yes. But Peter doesn't write, don't be afraid to open your home. He says be hospitable. You can be hospitable in a lot of different ways. Okay? And number one, to me anyway, is kind of like Billy was talking here, how you treat strangers. When you meet someone on the street, if they're speaking a foreign language, is your first assumption, well, they're plotting something evil against us? Or is your first assumption, okay, they're from a different land. I don't understand it. It's no big deal.
Thank God you can speak English.
If you move here, you should speak English. I've heard that
What's
lots of
also aggravating is to visit congregations where people show no feeling for me whatsoever.
Well, that's kind of where I was headed right now. I mean, this congregation, for the most part, has been very open to people that stroll in through the back door, and that's great. It is something that church families are sometimes reluctant to do, and if the front door is locked, it's hard to say that you're open to a stranger, you know. So.
And if they do you with a attitude of, now wait a minute, do you agree with me on this? Or do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, we choose sides.
Then you're not really welcome.
Yeah, we choose sides in a hurry, don't we? Hospitality demonstrates this fervent love, and I think that's why it's in here. And no surprise, hospitality is one of the traits of elders and overseers, and they talk about it a lot in Titus and Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1. Like Bernie said, the body of Christ is more mobile now. People are moving from place to place. You see more strangers. You see people that are walking off the street. You have to be hospitable in order to share the gospel message. And that entails some risk. It entails risk. I'll just be honest with you.
We had an experience this Christmas. We have invited the little girl's grandmother to join us for our occasions that week. Well, she finally came.
Oh, good.
And we all really enjoyed having her. I don't know if she just didn't know how we was going to talk, like we sat down to dinner. Now Vic is he's a member of the church, but he's not, but he says a beautiful prayer.
Okay.
Because he remembers when he could do that. But, we just went through the motions that we always do. But you see, she finally got up enough courage to join us, and she found out we're just normal people that kind of act similar, and she had a good time, and we did too.
Well, good. I'm glad it was a positive experience. All right. I think we're out of time. I'm going to leave it there. I appreciate your comments, and we'll continue on. Where do we leave off here? Verse 9. We'll start in verse 10.